right. Good afternoon and welcome all to this episode of the De-Escalation Station podcast. I'm Andy Prisco, and I'm here with my favorite person and co-host, the great Tony Blauer, coming to us from California. And we couldn't be more thrilled to be bringing to you today in this live format across social platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, the great Ernie Stevens from HBO's Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. To many of our viewers, I'm sure that an introduction of Ernie is not going to be necessary, but for those of you who may not be familiar with Ernie's global influence, I'd like to take a moment to just introduce him and provide a little bit of a background. Um, uh, Ernie is a nationally recognized crisis intervention expert and one of the featured officers on the HBO documentary Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. Ernie has spent decades in law enforcement redefining what policing can look like when compassion, communication, and mental health awareness become skills, not afterthoughts. Through groundbreaking work with the crisis intervention team model and the outreach model, he's helped transform how police agencies respond to people experiencing mental health crisis, emphasizing empathy, presence, and human connection rather than force or control. His work has influenced departments across the country, and he's opened critical conversations about de-escalation, trauma, and the emotional realities officers face every day. Ernie brings hard-earned insight from the street, powerful lessons in human behavior, and a perspective that every police officer, trainer, and citizen needs to hear. Ernie, welcome to the De-Escalation Station. It's great to have you.
Andy, thank you so much, man, for having me back. I know that we've spoke once in the past, so this is an honor. Tony, man, just I'm tongue tied, brother. Like it's great to meet you as well. A huge fan of both of you. You know, been following your careers, and just I cannot wait to have this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. It's our pleasure. And don't pay Tony too many compliments because thank goodness he doesn't have control of this because he'll
going.
mute me. Yeah.
Just another 50 or 60 minutes of that will be fine. Thank you.
Okay. Ernie, I think a great way to start, the theme of this discussion is what really happens on a crisis call. And one of the things that Tony and I are particularly interested in are the mechanics of how things work so that we can step into the education or the training space and be of some value to a workforce that is meeting very rapidly changing conditions on the crisis front. We are encountering more and more episodes of homelessness, serious mental illness, serious substance use conditions, fentanyl and methamphetamine, all of the incident management principles that are impacted as a result of those conditions. And, I can't think of anyone else, Ernie, who has been more on the front side of educating people to normalize to some degree um, the attributes of interpersonal interactions, communication, so that we can bring about better outcomes in these situations. But at the same time, there's some value, particularly with hosts like Tony and me, of diving into the mechanics of how these calls work. So I'd love to open the discussion with um, kind of a specific question. You know, our social media streams are filled with either video footage that's captured by cell phone or even body cam footage or headlines. But I'd love to hear your perspective, and I know Tony would too. In your experience, what actually happens physiologically and emotionally when officers arrive on a crisis scene? And we probably should define what a crisis scene is. A crisis scene would be defined in this discussion as a call for mental health services or some kind of presentation of mental health crisis. What are the things that officers physiologically and emotionally contend with when responding to that category of call?
No, I love the question. And I think the first thing you have to take into account is what is the level of training for the officer, right? Because if they're responding and they have a good background, and they've dealt with mental health, people in a mental health crisis time and time again, and they have, crisis intervention training. Like myself, I was on a mental health unit, so I knew every single call I went to was going to involve some kind of component of mental health. So I was very comfortable in my response. I knew more or less what I would most likely be encountering, right? Nothing's a one. So let's put that out there. But for the officers that don't have the training, I can see that as being a lot of anxiety. And I say that because that was me, right? Before the training, I didn't get any kind of crisis intervention training in the police academy back in the early 90s.
Nobody did.
No, nobody did, right? So when I got that call for somebody that had, a diagnosis of schizophrenia, they're hearing voices, now my anxiety is going up because I'm asking myself, why am I even being dispatched to this? I don't understand. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about this. So, there's self-doubt. I think there's a lot of self-doubt and anxiety that gets elevated, based on level of training, to where once you have some training and you've dealt with crises calls before, like you kind of described, social determinants of health calls, you're a little bit more expectant as to what could be the need of the individual, of the patient, right? And I think I use the word patient particularly because not suspect, not individual,
Right.
but a
Right.
patient, right? Is somebody that's going to need some services. So let's just call it what it is. So, to your question, I think there's going to be a wide range of physiological responses, everything from anxiety to, okay, this is what I know. This is what I'm being told. These are things I need to start thinking about as far as maybe a resource, or do I need to have access to a clinician on this call? So I think, again, everything kind of varies. It's on a scale. But again, I think it starts with training, the officer's level of training.
I love that his answers that, Tony. And when I hear him use the word doubt, I'm excited that he was courageous enough to describe that phenomena with that word. I believe that's absolutely true. Tony, your thoughts on, let's say, doubt and lack of training?
Well, I made a bunch of notes here because obviously this is prominent language inside our cycle of behavior, which is kind of a roadmap. Maybe we'll pop it up on the screen. I'll share it after, but it's a kind of a roadmap for how do we make decisions while under duress, what I call the neural circuitry of fear. And when there's a fear spike, it always triggers doubt. And this is unconscious. It's a default. It's like a domino effect. I don't care what your training is. If you get a fear spike, a physiological, neurobiological fear spike, you will have doubt. And doubt will always create hesitation. And this is where, I guess, probably some of the most misunderstood part of my research is the type A personality. And that was one of the big things I wrote here and circled, is anyone in law enforcement, or particularly law enforcement, is type A personality. And so which is different than a caregiver or a clinician, right? Who's there, do no harm. And so now you have, like Eddie and I do a lot of work with groups that got into their work to do no harm. And now we're talking to them about self-defense. And it's like this paradox. And then you've got people who want to be police officers and make, clean up the streets and catch the asocial predator. And now they're being told, you need to talk to this person, talk them off the ledge, right? And there's a conflict. And Ernie, you're 100% right. The blind spot is always the training, but the blind spot is also how people are wired and what they got into it to do. And that'll cause conflict. But back to Andy's point, and this is the thing that I want everyone listening to understand, regardless whether you're type A or whether you're do no harm, you're a yoga master, if you get a fear spike about anything, you automatically default to doubt and hesitation. Where things become dangerous is if you procrastinate, meaning there's an emerging threat, emotional, psychological, or physical. And if you're procrastinating, there's no way to spin procrastination as a good term or idea. So but the only thing that can stop any of us from procrastinating is self-awareness, right? Where you go to yourself, hey, I need to be doing something now. I need to be calling backup. I need to be calling this. Or I need to be backing away. I need to be using better words. It all comes back to the training and the education. But
The self-awareness.
Well, the self-awareness piece is, I mean, we're all aging athletes, so we remember the cliche, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so if a police officer is not trained in any modern, intelligent de-escalation, not just de-escalation strategies for a dysregulated person, but de-escalation of themselves. You just finished the war, you're retired, you become a cop, or you've never been punched in the face, and you just got into law enforcement, right? You got those two spectrums, and then you come up on a person who's not personally attacking you. They're not in the act of like this is an obvious black and white robbery or violent crime, but this dysregulation, that's chaos for somebody who doesn't know what to look for. And if you're going, well, should I shoot the person? Should I tase the person? Should I punch the person? Like those are all the hammers, right? And then the other side is like, I don't know what to do. But it all comes down to training.
Yeah, Tony, I love that you say awareness, because to me, when you say that, the first phrase that pops in my head is emotional intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. Now you've identified it, you've labeled it. Now, how do you regulate that with your own emotion on how to respond to it? And sometimes these things happen very quickly, yes. Right? And sometimes, if you wait too long, that could cost you your life. But as you're responding to calls, and as you have that doubt, or you have recognized and labeled that I'm aware of this fear, or I'm aware of this doubt, now you use that emotional intelligence to center yourself, to say, okay, I've recognized that. Now, what do I do with it? Right. And then you move forward.
Yes. Ernie, it makes me want to ask you, what are the common misunderstandings that people have about crisis calls before they have a few? Because there's got to be some that you probably see in young officers or new officers to this mode of response. They may become, because I would say the last 15 years, we've certainly gotten better in the BLEA, Basic Law Enforcement Academy setting, with mental health calls. But to your point, in the 90s, none of this was there. And the way that, CIT was still rolling out, it wasn't as global as it is now. Sam was still working in the Memphis area and really trying to push this model. And one could argue that CIT is really an awareness training more than anything else. It makes people aware of the options that are available, and they have to touch on so many pillars that there's definitely room for ongoing work with either the referral system, ongoing work with de-escalation, ongoing work with immersion. So an officer goes through that and hasn't had any crisis calls yet. What is it you think they come initially with that are maybe misunderstandings that crisis calls in reality eventually modify for them?
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak from my own experience. I thought every call I got that was mental health related, I took myself back to, well, what do I know about this? Well, on television, they're scary. They're going to attack me. They're dangerous. And you start going by what you know, because with your schemas, that's what you've learned, and you put it in that box, right? And it doesn't help. Like, I'll give you an example. At the police, at the academy, we would go out there as a mental health unit, train the cadets for a week in crisis intervention, right? They would love it. They'd be like, oh, this is great training. A week later, they would go to tactics, and then the instructors would say, forget everything they taught you. They're going to get you killed. And it's like, man, you're working against us. And every time they would run a scenario, it would be a mental health person that is trying to attack the officer. And I'm like, would you please,
come on.
Yeah. You're setting up these officers for failure if that's what you're teaching them. So I think, to your question, they're going to have to unlearn what they think they know and relearn what reality to these calls truly is.
God, I love that you said that. I couldn't agree more. And certainly when we see that, because we've all experienced it in the training setting, one silo having a, let's say, less than optimal opinion about another silo's work, but you're at the same institution. Like, how, when we think about the impacts of that just on the culture of learning, What are we doing when a student is going to one class, learning hard skills, then going to another class, learning softer skills, and the overall messaging isn't supportive of when and how these would be deployed. Instead, they're referred to as life threatening, or it's going to get you killed if you do that. Be preventative, take control early. You
Yeah,
know,
and it goes back to what you said earlier. I heard you say you used the term homelessness, right? So
yeah,
when we would go and we would train these courses, I would tell the officers, look, be very forthcoming. What's the first word that comes to your mind when I say, hey, somebody's out on the street and they're homeless? Smelly, drug addict, alcoholic, vagrant, hobo. You hear all this. And then I said, well, what if I told you the average age in Bexar County here in San Antonio, the average age of homelessness is 9 years old? Would that change your opinion? Because that is the average age when you take families and add their kids in that are living out of their cars or in some of these homeless shelters. That's the average age of somebody. So is that little 9-year-old alcoholic, a drug user? No, they're unhoused, right? We have to change the mindset of the officers to redefine what safety is, right? It can't always be the absence of crime. You have to look at it as the presence of well-being. And that's both within the community and within law enforcement itself, because a lot of the officers themselves struggle with their own mental health issues.
Nice.
Ernie, go ahead, Tony. You have something.
I mean, this comes back to our original meetings, Andy, that inspired Spear Care, and that is when Andy years ago approached me and said, your system could help revolutionize how we de-escalate. It was, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, you can fill it in, Andy, but I think it's because you knew that the SPEAR system, which is of course an acronym for Spontaneous Protection Enabling Accelerated Response, was entirely based on actual sciences of neurobiology, kinesiology, and psychology. How you think affects how you feel affects how you think. Both of those influence how you move and when you move. So if you're from a complex motor skills system where you come from a class where people say, here's some de-escalation, and then you go to a defensive tactics course and they go, oh, that's going to get you killed. Don't do that. Here's how you get to 2 o'clock. Here's how you armbar the person. But here's the thing, when we come back to self-awareness, is that officer at that level, the recruit level, just wants to pass. Their goal is, I want to get out of the academy and get on the street. So they're not going to be introspective and meditate on WUSA, what is it, and figure it out. And they don't have that experience. They just want to pass. And so we're not teaching people to have what we call a brain-based approach, where it's Socratic within yourself, going, why would I do this? Why wouldn't I do that? And to your point, like it was such a dramatic, it caught me off guard. The average age of homelessness in Bexar County, 9 years old. Like if you said that in a class, nobody has anything to say. They're like, but that doesn't mean they're not going to get into a fight to the death with a parent or a teenage kid. But what it does is it starts with empathy versus judgment when you move in. And to come back to Andy and how Andy and I connected is, I said, unless the officer or the caregiver or whomever actually understands how to manage violence emotionally, psychologically, and physically, all of the other cerebral strategies for it will fall short based on that individual's life experience as they penetrate the reactionary gap. Yeah. Meaning if like you said earlier, if you just became a cop, but you were a football coach and a wrestling coach, and you got a degree in psychology, and your family's incredibly toxic and dysfunctional, and you have all this life experience, you can create a level of rapport that other people can't. But it all comes back to the training. But I really believe that the quality of your de-escalation is proportional to your ability to say to yourself, if we got to go, I can protect myself. I'm going to do everything I can And I think that influences how close you get, how real you get when you're communicating, your body language. You're not looking for an escape route. You're not indexing your gun saying, hey, everything's okay, because that's body language, or, get ready to shoot. So anyways, I do a little rant there.
And to Tony's point, Ernie, you're in the gym a lot. You take care of yourself, and you took care of yourself then. So what I'm hearing Tony refer to, and what you didn't even verbalize yet, your capacity for it to become kinetic was always something that you maintained, that transferred to some degree of confidence when you're in the presence of someone who's presenting, let's say, stress or discontrol. Because there are so many videos of you kneeling down next to someone or getting at close distance where some armchair person would say, I would never get that close to someone who's mentally ill. Well, Ernie is completely capable of managing. He's doing calculated risk management. He's ready for whatever comes. He's not going into this, confused about what he's doing. Your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, first of all. And yes, to say, I think Tony put it best in Wrist Lock. Like, there were so many golden nuggets that you were dropping in that documentary. And I gleaned so much from that. But what I gleaned most, and what I talked to with the director of that film, Jason Harney, about was, I've been in martial arts since I was 5 years old. Right, I started out in Taekwondo, earned 2 black belts by the time I was in high school, and then I went to Tun Sun Ru Kung Fu, which was a white crane Kung Fu, hybrid Chinese boxing, and karate. And I did it for another 25 years. Not now, on any given day, anybody whip me, right? That's common sense, right? If you're not prepared. But it gives you the confidence to where you don't have to go into a scenario scared, right? It's like, okay, I've got the confidence that if something starts to pop off, hopefully I'm going to be able to control this, to the best of my ability. But I'm not going to go into this being scared, because if I'm scared, that's going to result in an unlikely use of force that I don't want to use. And, it's interesting. I love this conversation because I heard a defense lawyer ask this question for an officer that was on the stand. He goes, is it true that you went to deadly force because you're not physically capable to defend yourself?
Oh, Tony, did you just hear that?
That just opened up Pandora's box to every agency that's not properly training or making sure that their officers are in some kind of physical fitness standard, right? That they're not meeting it. And I got shook to my core when I heard that question. And you look at the officer, and the jury's looking at the officer wondering, how are you going to answer this?
Right.
Like, so I think going back to our original conversation, yes, the confidence, the way you hold yourself, the way you speak, the way you maybe have to change the intonation of your voice. It changes things, having the confidence to kneel down with someone, but you also rely on a good cover officer. Joe was my cover officer for years and years. So I knew Marine Corps veteran had my back. I was going to be safe. So there's a lot that goes into consideration, but your own self-awareness and what your capabilities are, I think, weigh heavily on that.
Ernie, I want to take a guess at this. I've never heard you say publicly, and it's wonderful that it just came out here. I've never known that you were a lifelong martial artist, and I don't think a lot of people do. And when was the last time you mentioned that?
I don't know. I really don't talk about it. It's not. Yeah, I don't talk about it too much. Don't need to.
But here's the point. What you credited your, let's say, freedom and willingness to lean into the unique conditions of mental health crisis calls to, you credited some of your confidence in that to the points that Tony was making. I have awareness that should something become kinetic, I'm going to be able to manage it because I have this experience base to draw from, that I'm not going to die if I take a lick on the chin. I may get smacked. Then I can decide what I'm going to do after that. Or I'm going to posture myself in such a way to reduce the likelihood of that, although I may get tagged, but I'm doing this in the service of trying to make an appreciable impact with someone. Nobody talks about that, Ernie. And I mean, unless you're Tony or me or you, maybe in a training setting, but these are not popular topics. So I'm so glad that came out in this conversation, because I think people need to hear that. And the principle that Tony describes it this way, because we've been together for some years now. Unless you manage the fear, it's very hard to lean into de-escalation. When you manage the fear, leaning into de-escalation comes much easier, which really leads us to the next question. In your experience, Ernie, how often does escalation happen because a responder is feeling out of control? In your observation, have you witnessed
Oh yeah.
a responder? So
Oh yeah.
we're featuring you. So if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. Yes. And one, again, for the first 15 years of my career in law enforcement, I was part of the problem, right? Because I didn't understand truly what I was dealing with. I went in there very heavy handed and listen to me, I'm in charge. And that doesn't work with somebody that's in a mental health crisis, right? If you
That's
have
right.
allergies and you're sneezing and I say, Andy, would you stop sneezing? Like you're not going to be able to stop doing that if you got allergies. So me telling somebody in a mental health crisis, I need you to calm down, be quiet, sit down, like that doesn't help the situation. That only aggravates it. And, once I received the training, you could see it during the role plays. You would have an officer come in, try doing some de-escalation skills, and then a cover officer come in, or we would send a medic in to the scene to kind of disrupt things a little bit to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And the role player would pop off, but we use these as role plays because they actually happen out in the field.
That's right.
You could have another officer show up and escalate things. It happens all the time. You'll have a firefighter or a paramedic show up, and you've worked very hard to calm the situation down. And then they find the barb and they escalate it. And now you got to find that hook and bring it back down. Right. So yeah, those are real barriers to de-escalation, is your environment. And it's not just the responders, it's family members, it's passerby, people passing by, hey, jump, you get all those people and it's like, really? So yeah, you got to deal with all those outside influences and be aware of them, number one, but then know how to mitigate them and still stay in contact and build rapport with the individual.
I'm so grateful. Ernie, you're such a good example. The first thing that came out of your mouth on that thought string was, for the first 15 years of my career, I wasn't doing it optimally. You actually said it differently. You said I was doing it wrong. And praise you for the freedom of expressing your own lessons learned. What you described phenomenologically happens in every setting. It happens in the juvenile justice setting. It happens in the adult corrections setting. It happens in the psychiatric care and services inpatient setting. It happens in the workplace violence prevention setting. Someone will be engaging in meaningful de-escalation, and someone else, or even a partner, will begin to experience some kind of stress or anxiety or discontrol and disrupt the general progress that's being made. I mean, how often that's happened on the fire ground with me, for God's sake, when we were engaged in one particular tactic that was, by all signs and indications, working very well, and someone who wasn't as informed as we were on the ground came over and just ordered a tactic change. And now the fire is growing again. Like, that phenomena happens in so many places that I'm so glad that you brought out. When you're self-regulated, not only are you going to have to manage the response, but you may have to manage your peers in relationship to what's happening in the moment. And I would say not enough people talk about that either. And I think, Tony, to your point, when I was with you in Vegas and we were doing your gigantic seminar there, some of the role plays with the guys in the high gear contemplated that kind of problem, where someone is engaging in some kind of de-escalatory effort, and then there's an unanticipated stressor that comes up and has to be dealt with. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in the same way we spell no fear, for anyone listening audio and not video, I spell no fear KNOW. And the idea is that, if you want to be, you can't be brave if you're not afraid. The primary ingredient of courage is fear. And that when we get to know fear, we can change our relationship with fear. So mismanaged fear versus managed fear. is the fuel that drives the outcome that we want. And so, to your question about other factors coming in there, when we talk and teach about multiple assailants, we always say, don't let the math beat you. If you're prepared to protect yourself against one person, you can handle two or three. But the only way you can handle two or three is if you contemplate it. But you can't contemplate three until you've taken care of the math of one, minus one. You got to do the subtraction. And so in the Socratic approach that is the spear system, we say, what's your scenario? And you just start dropping things into, we've got all these kind of really neat graphics and models that get you to hyper analyze, like our timeline of violence in the care and services spear care world. We say timeline of escalation. There's all these elements that you can look at, and what would happen if you were thinking about so D1, D2, D3, detect and avoid, defuse, DEFUSE, to take the fuse out, to disempower, and then if necessary, morally, ethically, legally protect yourself. The third D, defend. But what a lot of people do is they say, lip service, D1, head on a swivel, left a bang, watch out for the anomaly. D2, make sure what you say treats this person with dignity and respect. Say something like this. This is really good in court if we hear you say this. And here's what to do if here's you get out of a headlock. And the people rush to get to the psychomotor skill.
Yes.
But they're not spending. And the reality is, if you manage D1 and D2, there is no D3.
That's right.
I didn't finish because I love tangents. Coming back to the concept of like you're here, everything's under control, and then some guy or gal who thinks they're the supervisor with more experience comes in and says, "Why isn't this happening? Or why isn't he doing that?" And everything goes sideways, right? And it could just be like you said, Andy. Someone just shows up, and it just undermines like the flow. When I want everyone here to contemplate multiple assailants, but sometimes the assailant is a negative thought. So one of the assailants is your fear.
Yes.
Another assailant is, I've got this kid under control, and then the father comes home and he slams the door. He's, get the hell out of my house, and things start
blows it up.
And now you have this kid who is like about to self-harm, has a weapon near him, and now this pair, right? This is multiple assailants, and you don't, but you can't manage the Gatling gun of all of these threats coming at you by just talking about head on a swivel. You've got to look at what would I do here? What would I do here? You got to role play them. It doesn't mean you need a full-on scenario, as much as I'd like everyone to buy 2 high gear suits and do scenarios, but you need to talk about it. And it's like the military's PACE acronym, which is so wonderful, which I'm sure you guys know, but if you don't know, it's what's your plan, what's your alternate plan, what's your contingency plan, and what's your emergency plan. So you've got like 4 layers of, hey, I'm going to talk to this person, and if they jump me, I'll restrain them and control, and I'll talk nicely to them. Oh, if this starts to happen, I'm probably going to have to strike them. I don't want to do that. Like a combat swimmer, like in the old days, knew how to knock somebody out if he was going to drown.
That's right.
But you don't jump in the water contemplating a rear strangle or what kind of elbow you're going to use. You're running there to kind of do this and help the person. But
yes.
If they grab you because you're the only thing that's buoyant and you're going down, you go, well, I'm going to die unless I knock this person out.
Right.
But you don't start with D3. You start with.
I love it. I love it. We're talking about these principles, Ernie. You've been in the training domain for a while. Tony and I certainly have been, and we've seen this, but we want to ask you, and I won't confine it to officers because you train a lot of people, behavioral health people, human services people. Why do you think there are always some in a class
I have a theory.
Do this? Yes, I'd love to hear yours because part of the gifts, I think, of being good at teaching this is breaking this down and acquiring allies. These are my favorite people in class.
Yeah.
but they
And
resist the training. Let's hear.
yeah, so
Ernie
here's
Stevens'
my
world.
theory on this, and I'll tell you why it's not just a theory, but I was able to speak to officers that would come in with that body language and then leave a changed person. And this is what I found. Because when CIT training first started to roll out, we started teaching it back in 2005. At first we were looking for volunteers. The chief said, hey, we want 10% of patrol volunteers. So you got the people that wanted to come, but then the chief said, I want everybody trained. Why shouldn't everybody be trained? Well, then that pissed off a lot of officers that had been on the
Oh
department
yeah,
25, 30 years going, I'm not going to that hug a thug. I would rather retire than take, and some did. Some did retire to get out of taking the class, right? But the ones that came and did this, what I found was that at some point in their life, they had a direct connection to somebody with a mental health diagnosis, whether it was a family
oh
member,
yes,
a loved one, a good friend, and the system let them down, right? Something happened where they weren't able to get help, or there was a negative outcome. And when that happened, they gave up. I give up on the system. I'm not going to listen to this. It doesn't work. Nobody's truly trying to help anybody out there. They just want the insurance money. If they're unfunded, they're treated and streeted. Like you would hear these things. But then by the end of the week, it was like, oh, well, now I get it. Now I understand why my brother acted that way. I didn't
yeah,
know that my dad, he never talked about Vietnam. So I didn't know why he got angry all the time. I didn't know that's why he drinks and abuses mom. Or now I know. Now I have a better understanding. And
yes,
now I know there is truly help available. I just didn't understand why the behaviors were the way they were. So a lot of that, I think I saw unfold from this day 1, day 2, day 3 to day 4 to day
yes,
5. And they
yes,
got it. And then once they got it, we would get feedback and say, hey, Ernie, I was sorry I was kind of an ass in the class, but I went out on this call and I used some of the techniques you talked about, and
yep,
and I understood it better, and I had a good outcome, and I actually felt good about it, because that's why you get into this line of work. You truly do want to help people. And when you get cynical over time and you lose faith in that, but then something sparks that fire
yes.
again, and then you exercise it and it works, you remind yourself, this is why I got into this to begin with.
Ernie, God bless you. Um, to that point, I'll sum it up, same but different. In my experience, these people have generally been multiple lethal force delivery encounters that were very traumatic for them on imprinting, and they're looking at an approach that they equate to resulting in their own risk of injury or death, which we eventually solve in the training. That's one person. The other person, someone who has suffered some kind of physical injury or beating more than once and has a very similar worldview. That'll never work here. That won't work in my institution with oppositional defiant kids. That won't work in my psychiatric facility with people living with schizophrenia. That won't work in my adult correction facility, because if we do that, they're going to think that we do not have control of the place, and then they're going to have the run of it. It's like generally in those categories where we eventually get to your point, is someone has had a deep personal emotionally imprinting experience which drives their current worldview, and then when they learn that they now know something they didn't know, they reappraise what they did previously, and sometimes they show up and they reveal that they feel shame or regret.
Yeah, you know what class we started teaching to really help the officers get that was adverse childhood experiences.
Oh, the aces, no doubt, no
Yeah,
doubt.
because an officer, like, they don't know what they don't know. And if they've got unprocessed trauma that they never knew about, until they learn about that, because you ask them, right? Hey, well, somebody give me an example. What is trauma? And then you hear it all, right? Trauma is when something bad happens to you. I'm like, well, not quite, right? Trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. Now that changes
Mhm.
things. And once you understand that, then you start to understand, oh, well, is that why I respond to calls involving children the way I do? Because maybe I'm still that child, right? I've got unprocessed trauma and I see myself as that child. So I need to do this a certain way, but now I understand it, right? I think learning about ACEs truly is revolutionary for officers, because it's a training they normally
For everybody, Ernie, for everybody, man.
specifically for 8 personalities that want to go in. Because I tell them, look, when a paramedic goes to the scene, every one of them puts on a rubber gloves, right? For communicable diseases. They all get out of the vehicle wearing gloves. Well, what if you, as an officer on the way to a call, what if you gloved up your brain and thought for a minute, what if I'm responding to unresolved trauma? And what if I responded in a trauma-informed care approach? Maybe there'll be a better outcome, right? Instead of like what Tony said, everything's a nail if all you got's a hammer, right?
Right. The law of the instrument. Yeah.
I don't know. It just makes
Ernie,
sense
I
to me.
love that example that we call that body substance isolation, scene safe. You know what? Ernie Stevens just coined a new allegory to body substance isolation. You are now the emotional substance isolation guy. You're telling people, do your ESI instead of BSI. Do your emotional substance isolation, scene safe. Your presentation is not going to infect me.
Right.
I'm going to protect myself in an epidemiological sense. But Tony, as Ernie is talking, Tony's one of those unicorns, and I'm gonna throw some shine on you, Tony. You're a guy who converted deeply emotionally imprinting experiences as a young athlete and turned them into an entire system that helps the world. Because Tony's lived experience, and Tony, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, Tony's lived experience in what he expresses himself today with is a direct result of him leaning into his own personal fear to overcome things that he could not understand. Tony, can you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm thinking about the skiing, the beatings, the things that you said. What you did with that was what other people would not do. It's very unusual what you did with that. You turned it into something much different.
Thanks. I mean, I make it sound more Hollywood by saying origin stories. You know, like just when I got jumped when I was 12, and the way I navigated the fear and the violence was like I shouldn't have understood that at 12 years old, and it kind of like I just went down the rabbit hole for decades, and then as I started teaching self-defense, which was an accident, I kept on almost unconsciously trying to create drills and conversations with students around fear and psychology and emotion because I was trying to educate myself. But I couldn't say to somebody, hey, this is a whole blind spot. And I just remembered when I started to talk about no fear before, we were talking about blind spots and the multiple assailants and all that stuff, that when I do I got a presentation called Violence Loves Speed. And in it, there's one slide is a big picture of an eyeball from the side. And I talk about the eyeball's blind spot. And I write the word, you want to know your blind spots. And I spell no blind spots as KNOW as well. You can look at all the events and all the experiences of the world and go, that's never happened to me. So I have zero understanding of how to manage it. I could also think it'll never happen to me, which ensures that I'll never prepare for it. Right. I can say, hey, I live in a bubble. This is a nice area, which means when it does happen, I will be in the fear loop way longer than somebody who's got at least 1 or 2 reps in on, the kind of what if. So I knew managing fear was a wicked blind spot. I knew that as I got really good at martial arts, whether I was sparring or competing or defending myself in the street, I noticed that all of my finesse and self-control went completely out the window. Like the fear was just overwhelming. And I couldn't use fine and complex motor skills. And I would laugh after I go, well, that was good. Like I just got in a fight with somebody, and like I remember that, like I think I invented the road rage fight back in the 80s. Road rage wasn't a thing then. It was like my fight that started the whole thing. But I cut some guy off, and he got pissed off, and he jumped out of his car, and it was a hot summer day, and I had forgotten about it. My window was down, and all of a sudden I hear like tires screech to a halt, and we're in traffic, and I look back, and he's like running down the road, like 3 cars back. And I could have rolled up my window, but I was boxed in, and I was like 17 years old. I jumped out of the car, and he comes running at me, and I'm like really good at Taekwondo. This is like perfect for a sidekick, or I could, and I just go like this. I just go, oh shit, right? And I run into that. We're rolling around, and thank God it was the 80s because nobody was filming.
Yeah.
So people jumped in the car to break us up. But after I sat there, I said, I didn't throw a kick. I didn't throw a punch. I'd wrestled. I didn't do a takedown. I didn't do anything. We were just like rolling around in my car going, it was like if that was on the internet now, I would be paying somebody to try and scrape the internet. It was so embarrassing. But what I did, I think what my obsession was, and it's not a passion I have for making people safe, it's an obsession, is I was dumbfounded as to why I was so scared, why I couldn't think, why I couldn't do any of these complex motor skills. And I would literally spend hours thinking about it. And so when I, in a decade later, creating the No Fear program, the ballistic microfight approach to doing force-on-force scenarios, the high gear, the cycle of behavior for fear management, the SPEAR system, how to ethically weaponize fear and the startle response. It was all because of the fear I had as a young athlete, as a young martial artist, not understanding why. So I mean, it's wonderful in that I can look back now and go, it was all true and organic. It wasn't, I need a cool acronym to launch a new company. It was really done in the service of trying to help other people.
Yes.
And it was magical when I realized that everybody, and to your point when you were talking about unresolved issues, every single person who started martial arts to learn self-defense and then got caught up in getting their 10th degree black belt or getting good at musical kata and how many boards I can break, but everyone who legitimately got into martial arts wanted to be able to protect themselves. They wanted to be, and then they lost the path because there's zero evidence of traditional classical martial arts, mainstream, solving violent encounters in the street. There's zero evidence of it. And you as a lifelong martial artist might be going, what are you talking about? I did this armbar on this guy. I did this, I choked this guy out. I kicked this guy here. There's 2 types of violent encounters. There's a violent encounter that is consensual, what we call ACP, awareness, consent, preparation, where you can be doing, okay, he's moving here, he's looking here, he just target glanced my gun. Okay, here, hit him here. When he moves that way, sweep him, throw him on the ground. And you can see it because you're trained. Most people can't do that. It's an anomaly event. If you look at the thousands of body cam dashboard videos, how many times have you seen somebody look like John Wick? Right? Almost zero. But we all have on our agency, like Ernie, you might have been the John Wick of your time on the agency. Like if something kicked off, but because it was it wasn't, so the second type of violent encounter is a jack-in-the-box violent encounter, a term I like to use, right? We got the jack-in-the-box, we got the music going, dun, 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 and we know the clown representing the sudden assault is going to pop, but action's faster than reaction. There's no way you can stop the lid before it pops. There's no way you can, index the clown's face before it pops out and goes, Arr. So there's always a micro flinch and then you got to move. But even in that example, there was ACP, awareness, consent, preparation. You knew you were doing a jack-in-the-box drill. When it's a true surprise, executive function is hijacked, cognitive brain is bypassed, the limbic system, reactive brain, amygdala run the show for a couple of seconds at least until you can get to your training. And if you haven't had the training, that time lag is longer.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So, anyways, I don't know if I answered your question, Andy, but
I think you did. What what I wanted you to expand on, great, that's a great word, is the conversion of your deep personal experience. In trauma informed or trauma responsive services, we're interested in saying what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. So we say,
Right.
what happened? And the literature now is even moving toward trauma responsive, because you can be trauma informed all day, but sometimes you can hear all this information but not apply it in the response. It has to be brought into action. You did something with those formative experiences in you, Tony, that was very responsive into the world. And to Ernie's point, he can provide moments for officers through introducing the adverse childhood experiences matrix of information to help officers reframe the lens through which they look at someone who's presenting stress or discontrol. And which, Ernie, this leads to like what we're building up as like these final series of questions. You are part of what became a center of excellence in San Antonio. Like de-escalation really did get baked into the culture there from from a place of complete naivete, let's say. It's now a much different culture due to your formative work, along with others. Because I know you, if I say it's you, you're immediately going to say, no, it's not just me, it's all these people. So I'm going to do that for you. But you are central to that. It's become baked into the culture. I've seen some places and have been involved in baking it into the culture. It takes a long time. When we think about the experience of an officer or a new employee, a corrections officer, security officer, juvenile justice, youth specialist, EMT, paramedic, sometimes it's not baked into the culture yet. And they're going to do things that slow down. They're going to engage in dialogue with a person in crisis that's going to look to other people as warm and fuzzy, hug a thug, this is taking too long. What do you say to the officers that have to manage the cultural resistance to what they're trying to do?
I love it, because what happened to me, and it became a reality, was for the first 15 years, like I mentioned, not just being part of the problem, I was trying to go out there and change the world. I had a moment where I realized I've got to change myself, right? Because I was driving a wedge between the community and law enforcement. At the time,
Yeah.
before I went to the training, I was assigned to the gang unit. We worked very marginalized communities. We were told to go out, find guns, drugs, and gang members. Every time you do, you're going to get a pat on the back. They're going to hand you a piece of paper at roll call. But to find that one gun, to find that bag of dope, I've got to stop 25, 30, 40, 50 cars, right? Well, what am I doing to those 25, 30, 40 people or cars full of people where I'm not finding anything, but I'm pulling everybody out and get out of the car. Do you have any drugs in the car? Mind if I look? Of course you don't mind if I look, right? You're driving this wedge. And I realized, man, I'm part of the problem. Like, this is why the community doesn't like us. And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And it took going to this training to realize you got to start changing something inside of you, because even though the agency or the department gives you the attaboys and they're telling you you're doing good work, because maybe a lot of this time this work is tied to a grant, and the grant keeps coming in and providing money for an agency based on outcomes and performance. At some point, you've got to look at the work that you're doing and saying, am I making a difference? Am I leaving a footprint? Because how do we gauge success in this career? If you ask anybody who's got 30 years on the department, hey, how do you gauge success? Well, I survived. Well, that's it. You survived?
Right.
That's the goal of a 30-year career. Well, what about I added value? I added a benefit to the community I serve, right? What are we doing? So for those officers that are doing a good job and putting in that effort, continue to do so, because law enforcement is a very noble profession, and we're at a very pivotal time in this day and age. I don't care what side of the administration you're on, where if we step too far over the line, it's going to have severe consequences. And we've seen that. And we're trying to recover from that, right? We're trying to recover from that. And how do we do that? By treating people with dignity and respect. And we listen with equity, right? And dignity. So it's not a new way of policing. If you look back at Sir Robert Peel's principles of policing, the people are the police and the police are the people. It goes back to foundational policing. So,
oh God, I couldn't agree more.
Well, I mean, it just makes sense that we get back to a mindset of procedural justice and legitimacy when it comes to this line of work.
So to those officers that are feeling judged, what you're saying is you're doing it right. Keep doing it.
Oh, I was told, oh right. Man, you should have heard what they would call us, right? When I left the gang unit to go to start a mental health unit, they thought I had lost my mind. Well, you're the one that needs mental health. What are you doing? We're kicking doors and going after gangbangers and doing all of the stuff in the brochure that you signed up to do because that's what's in the brochure, right? It's not a picture of an officer with his arm around another officer saying, hey, man, I'm sorry, but we're going to get through this together. That's not in the brochure, but that's the reality of the job, right? So I think you've got to put these things in perspective because, yes, I heard the naysayers, and I'm like, it's okay. We can agree to disagree, but try it your way. Try it the way that we're training, and you tell me what kind of outcomes you're having. But be honest. Give it an honest run.
We Ernie, we share some relationships. I'm in Brooklyn right now where my good friend Jack Cambria lives, and we get together every time I'm here. And he told me a story when he was commanding the NYPD's hostage negotiation team. He said the ESU, which is their SWAT team, the Emergency Services Unit, used to refer to the negotiation team as the Mouth Marines. Oh, here come the Mouth Marines, And Gary Nesner would say it all the time. Negotiating with David Koresh was 10 times easier than going over to the command tent and trying to tell those guys what the hell we're trying to do here. So his advice at the time was, if you're going to wait for command to come to the negotiator tent and find out what we're doing, you're going to be like the Maytag repairman. Nobody's going to come calling. Yeah. You have to go over to the command tent and say, hey, here are the gains we're making. Here's what we're getting by virtue of this approach. Here are the hostages that we were able to bring out of there today. Because there are people who are looking at their watch, holding rifles, getting impatient. Like, they don't want this siege to go on forever. They have a bailiwick that they're feeling feelings about wanting to do, but they have to stage and be prepared should negotiations, let's say, not bring about the outcomes in a way that command wants. So the tension always seems to be greater intra the agency rather than the work. I think that may be your finding also. People find that de-escalating people in mental health crisis is a lot easier than having to do it in an environment where that's not welcome.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts, and I'd love Tony weigh in on this, is knowing when to walk away. Some agencies have to put a disengagement policy in place, to mitigate these incidents from going too far.
Sideways.
Right? And that's hard to do. That's hard to do. Wait for a supervisor when you're in the middle of a car chase, tell you, okay, stop, shut it down, turn your lights off. And you're like, man, what are you talking about, man? I've been chasing this dude for, blah, blah, blah. And it's an ego strike. Same thing when you're trying to negotiate with somebody inside their house, but you understand they're alone, they're not a danger to anybody else, and you've got to disengage. At some point, you may have to disengage and then revisit that the next day. So, this job, as egotistical as it can become if you allow it, you can also find a way to balance yourself and check that ego in the interest of the safety of the community.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I'm thinking about our closing questions. Ernie, what do, in your opinion, great crisis responders understand that average, let's say, not fully informed people in crisis response don't understand? What is it that great responders understand?
I think they understand how to focus on the person and not the problem. Because
they can humanize the person.
Yeah, the problem's emotionally charged, but that's not the person, right? That's the emotion. I think if you can focus on the person, not the problem, then what you get is connection over correction, right? You learn how to connect with a person instead of always just trying to connect or correct the behavior, right? So I think a good, well-trained responder understands that.
I couldn't agree more. What gives you hope about the future of crisis work in public safety and police agencies?
Yeah, well, now that I work at the national level, at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, I see the federal government putting a lot more money into these kind of programs, right? Whether it's the Justice Mental Health Police Collaboration Grant, the Public Safety Mental Health Initiative, there are millions of dollars coming to the forefront by the government being released now. Just recently, they've released a lot of these dollars for notice of funding opportunities, and they've put an emphasis on crisis response, on crisis intervention training, on crisis stabilization centers, on reentry, on data sharing, on like all these different areas that meet the community where they are to solve a lot of these issues. So the criminal justice system isn't used as a gateway to just continue a revolving door, or the hospital system, right? So that gives me hope, is that, we're moving in the right direction. I know sometimes you pivot based on administrations and you got to go a different way every now and then. That's okay. You've got to be open-minded and find a way to make these things work.
What does courage look like, Ernie, on a crisis call? Because Tony talks about this a lot. In fact, Tony, I think your slogan about it is almost life-changing. People say fear is contagious, but so is courage, and you can't be courageous without fear. So what does courage look like on a crisis call, Ernie? What does an officer have an image of? What's the model of courage?
Yeah, to me, it's being vulnerable. Are you able to be vulnerable to this individual? Are you truly going to be authentic and allow yourself to be seen? Not be seen as the officer that showed up. Take your mask off, set it down, and let's talk. Let's have a real conversation, because real recognizes real. And somebody that's in crisis will call BS when it's BS. But if you're truly being authentic and you're being vulnerable, Joe was really good at that, because his A score was an 8. He could connect with a lot of people that were going through a lot of traumatic events, because he'd been there, done that, right? The BD and D, right? Been there, done that. So to me, that's courage, is allowing yourself to be seen.
Tony, how does courage work?
I mean, not to just echo or parrot what you just said, but it's just it's kind of autopilot for me right now. It's our relationship with fear is everything. That the primary ingredient of courage is fear, and you can't be brave if you're not afraid. Everyone wants to be courageous. You ask anybody, would you like to have the courage now to, whether it's step off the bridge or be a better parent, or get off the street and get and get things together and change your life. All of it is just this big onion of fear that people. I always make the joke, you've heard me say this 100 times, Andy, that fear management needs new management, because nobody wants to talk about fear. To Ernie's point, is especially a type A personality, we don't want to be vulnerable, right? But it's a real superpower if you're not manipulating it or milking it. It's true empathy, and that's the only way. It's like, hey, if you look at someone and go, I know exactly how you feel, in some way, like you said, real recognizes real. That angle there. So to me, there's like Andy, you know this. I could talk for hours on courage, but the idea is there's a moment in our program we call this the 3 I's: instincts, intuition, and intelligence. Instincts, intuition, intelligence. We all know, and I never answered the question, Ernie, when you said, hey, about knowing when to walk away, right? And that's the 3 I's. You've got this training, you've got this experience, you've got this wisdom, you're there. You should be able to walk out and go, we can't help them. You're going to have to send the team in. I just know this, right? But the only person that's going to know that is someone who also understands how to manage violence and how to protect himself, right? Where you can see that the proverbial 1,000-yard stare or some other pre-contact indicator. But also the other way, you can come in there and go, I know that if I have a little bit more time with this person, I can make a difference here. We're gonna have the outcome that we want. And again, so if you have an unconscious bias towards just the way you do things, right? It's the hammer, right? So the trained social worker, de-escalator, it was always going to go, I need more time. The sniper is going to go, I'm running out of time. but what we want is I would like to have, and I used to make this 30 years ago, and I actually taught a bunch of courses in San Antonio years ago. I wish we had crossed paths back then, but I would tell everybody, because I was talking about de-escalation in the late 80s, and I would say your sniper needs to be the person who goes in with the social worker or to be trained, because that person is going, I can fix you, I can do this. The other person's going, and they can communicate. I'm giving it's like, hey, I've been near extremely dysregulated people and extremely, like, the difference between an asocial predator and somebody dysregulated. Only a certain person with a certain experience can tell the difference.
That's right.
Because some of that fear or anger that they're what's the word I'm looking for? Conveying or portraying.
Presenting.
Yeah, that was it. Thank you. Is going to be misread by half the people, right? So it's just an interesting thing. Is like, everyone. It's like when in law enforcement they would get an open-minded journalist to come do some force CQB training.
Uh-huh.
Why'd you shoot him? Why'd you do that? And they go through that, and someone who's honest goes, "Holy shit, that was the scariest shit I've ever done. I don't even know how you guys do that." Like, there's an empathy there. It says, you know what? I'm not going to, do this hit piece on you in the media, because now I understand. People don't understand, and it all starts with managing fear. And here's the other thing about courage, Andy, and I always say this, but I almost forgot. The act of courage only presents itself when you are scared. And that's something that the type A personality doesn't get. So if you're not comfortable with the self-awareness of being vulnerable, and something starts and you start to feel dysregulated, your brain is going to rationalize an excuse for why, you think of some of the school shootings, why we're not running in there, even though we hear people shooting kids and kids screaming. And we're saying, well, it's because we were told to step back here, or that's not the SOP. No, that's fear management.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments in the film of Ernie and Joe is when Kendra is on the bridge and she's getting ready to jump. And I told her, I said, you got me really scared right now. Mm. And I sat down on the bridge, and I won't spoiler alert anybody, but I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted her to know how I was feeling, right? I did not, trust me, it wasn't about me in the moment. It was about her. But
yes,
her reactions were making me scared. And I wanted to make sure that I communicated that to her. So I sat down because I knew she was scared too. She just didn't want to tell me that. She wanted to yell at me and cuss me because all she saw was a uniform. But I know she was scared. She was terrified. She was scared of life. But I was scared of heights. And I didn't tell her that. And I'm up there on the bridge with her, right? So this is part of the reason I sat down. And a lot of people are like, why'd you sit down? I'm like, well, one, I wanted her to feel elevated in that moment, right? It's like when somebody's holding a knife. And please don't take this as a bad tactic, but when I see somebody holding a knife, that's almost to me like that's their microphone in the moment. They want to be heard. And as long as they have that, they're going to be heard, right? Until they put that down, and then they surrender that power. And it's kind of like the same thing. If somebody's about to jump, or somebody's, wants to, is holding a gun, you've got to relinquish some power at some point, be vulnerable, let them know how you're feeling. And in that particular case, for those that haven't seen it, go watch it and let me know what you think about the outcome.
Wow. Ernie, you got a book? Tell us about it. How do people?
I got a couple of them, man. Where are they at? Thanks for bringing it up.
Show us.
I've got one that I just wrote called 101 Questions to Ask Before Becoming a Law Enforcement Officer.
Nice.
And I wrote that.
Oh, that's with you and Scott, right?
Yeah, me and Scott Medlin wrote that one. And it's really a career pathway book. It's not just what do I need to know before I choose this career. It's how do I manage emotions? How do I manage retirement? How do I prepare for retirement? How do I deal with changing technology? Right. So there's everything from what type of law enforcement do I want to get into? How do I choose that? What do I need to know? All the way through the end of your career. We just put that one out. And then I've got another one called Mental Health and De-Escalation. That book went #1 on Amazon, man. It was a fantastic ride. I did that one with Nick Ruggiero. And it all talks about the foundation of mental health and de-escalation and kind of lays out the foundational courses for those agencies that can't give up an officer to go to a training for 40 hours or go to a CIT international conference that's expensive, or, you know, it was kind of for those rural or frontier officers not knowing that, you know, it was going to do so well. And it's we've had a great response with that. So thank you for asking about that.
Yeah, of course. And then, you know, you also have a very robust speaking and training practice. You know, we were just talking in the green room. You were out in Connecticut with Kevin Briggs, our good friend, the guardian of the Golden Gate. You're always presenting at a CIT conference, or very often you're being contracted to discuss or implement training at a system. How do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the great Ernie Stevens?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look at, you know, just look me up, Ernest Stevens, or I'm on Twitter at East Stevens 845 on Twitter. You can look me up there. But yeah,
you have a website too, don't you?
I got a website, you know, www.erneststevens.com. And there's a link there that you can leave me a message or ask a question. And yeah,
you can buy the book there too, correct?
Yeah, I've got books, coins, posters, whatever. And just so you know, I do that in order to give back. So I donate back to the National Alliance on Mental Illness or peer support trainings or things like that, because I'd love to be able to give back.
Well, I can tell you, as someone who is very supportive of all the work that you're doing, I really appreciate your willingness to take this conversation in a slightly different direction than you normally go into with some other programs. And I think the substance of this conversation really was rich and is something that, you know, is an indicator that we need to talk more about fear management, managing anxiety, the ACEs. What are we doing in education with people? You don't even have to say police officers, with people, in how to respond to the presentation of stress and dysregulation in other folks. And then, of course, you know, to recognize that the people who do well at this are people who are find the courage to do so. It's very hard to be good at this work and not be courageous. There's no such thing as doing this and there never being any discomfort. You know, it's part of the package. Leaning into discomfort, personal discomfort, is part of the package. I think that really came out in our discussion. Tony, what are your final thoughts?
I loved the conversation. I took a bunch of notes that you can tell, Ernie, that, I mean, you live what you believe in, and you. Yeah. It was very enjoyable. It was a fun talk. I got pages of notes here, and it was great. These are always fun, Andy.
Ernie, we hope to have you back. We'd love to have you back before long to talk more about these topics. I think they need to be heard.
Yeah, and Andy, if I could just throw one thing out before we go, on LinkedIn, we are running a Kickstarter with movie director Jason Harney called Code Red, a cardiac wake-up call. And the film is going to be a documentary. I'll be featured in that to bring awareness about heart disease and heart risk to first responders. We've only got about a week left of the Kickstarter. So if this episode airs after that, don't worry, get a hold of me. We'll see if we can still find a way to get that funded. And we would love to bring that to the community for people to see, especially to bring awareness to first responders.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for your time and attention during this call. It's been a wonderful conversation. We look forward to more with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.